Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Community and Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We'll go straight into it as we have a fairly long agenda this evening. Sorry, my laptop has just frozen. Bear with me one moment. Firstly, we will go for apologies for absence and any substitutes.
Apologies from Councillor George Evans. Councillor Peter Harper is here as a substitute.
Welcome. Item 2 is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting of the 17th of December, which even though it was last year, it does seem like it's a long time ago. Any questions or matters arising or things to raise or correct? If not, can I have a show of hands? Great, none to the contrary. I'll sign those as we go through. Next item is declarations of interest. Does any member have any interest to declare on any of the items on this evening's agenda? No? Excellent. Public question time. I am aware of 3.
Yes.
Good evening, Dave. Give you a second for you to get settled and for you to get settled. So, yes, sorry, we have 3 questions, I believe, from the public this evening.
Yes. So we have 2 of the questioners here in person. I believe, Chair, that the 2 questions are being taken as read. There's a 3rd question that was supplementary as well, so happy for you to read out the answer.
Yeah, thank you. Are you okay if I stop smashing up the furniture? Are you okay for me to take those questions that you've submitted as read? Brilliant, thank you. The 3rd question, which I will just mention because it's added as a supplementary. The 3 questions that we've had this evening are of a very similar nature relating to parking. And so we have a long written answer, which I will read out, and you'll get a copy of it afterwards. If you have any questions afterwards, you can have supplementary questions that arise from it. If there's something you want to clarify or don't understand in what I've said, just feel free to ask. And then have you been explained how to use the microphones?
Yes.
Excellent. Right, that's progress. So there are 3 questions relating to parking. And the parking penalty appeals process is a legal process, as I said to you before, and is set out in the government's statutory guidance for local authorities in England on civil enforcement of parking contraventions, which is basically the government sets out how the process should work. All local authorities which have civil parking enforcement powers, which include us, have to comply with this guidance. And the guidance basically stipulates the appeal process and the requirement for authorities such as us to have what's described as a robust policy for the enforcement and cancellation of parking or penalty charge notices. And this policy was reviewed and approved by members when the council received the powers for parking enforcement, and all of that information is on the website. Every person who received a penalty notice has the right to make an informal challenge, and if they are unsuccessful, they can make a formal representation. And then finally, the final step of it is an appeal to what's called the Independent Traffic Penalty Tribunal, the TPT, which positively trips off the tongue as a name. And if they believe that a parking, if a penalty charge notice has not been issued correctly. So similar to planning applications, when it's sent to appeal, the independent service may see things differently to the council, and that they may see things differently to us, and they may overturn the decision that the council has made. And if they agree that Woking Borough Council has been wrong, we will look at the reasons from them and either put it right on the street what was wrong, so maybe signage was wrong. We'll review our guidance policies for the enforcement and the cancellation of PCN. So basically we learn the lessons and any guidance that comes from that body. And decisions are made by the council, or decisions that are made by the council are based on evidence presented and photos that are taken at the time that the PCNs were issued, and that we rely on the sort of the professional integrity of all of our trained enforcement officers, who are the folks that are out there on the streets enforcing the parking. The photos they've taken, for example, which I think you'll have seen from the appeals process, they're all time and date stamped as well, so there's a permanent record of when that happened. So with regard to the penalty charge notices issued in Remenham, the restriction signs were in place at the time that the contravention was observed, and our enforcement officer correctly issued the tickets on that basis. Decisions made by the council, as I said, are based on the evidence presented and the photographs taken at the time. So they looked at the information from the photos, from everything else when you made the first day, and then that's where the decision was made to move forward. When they showed that the signs were in place with the correct dates and times of enforcement, and that the evidence supported that the PCNs had been issued correctly. When checking with our contractor, they confirmed that the signs in question were put up at the beginning of the day. We have no reason to disbelieve this. And again, this goes back on the integrity of the service that's done and the integrity of the officers that deliver that service. So the right of appeal at the TPT, so the Traffic Penalty Tribunal, is available to anyone who receives a penalty notice to enable a fully independent review of the council's decision. So it's the final step. It's a fully independent body. It's not part of the council. And if they have a difference of opinion or a different opinion to us when they review the evidence, they have the power to basically change the outcome. But in these instances, the TPT considered all of the evidence and noted that the civil enforcement officer's photographs confirm there was a sign in place at the time of the contravention with all the right details on it. But they had no clear evidence that the sign was in place prior to when they parked, and therefore they concluded to allow the appeal. So this is where they've considered the information, they've looked at the information again through their eyes, they've considered it through the independent process, and they lacked the proof from us and the evidence that the signs were in place. It's not to say they weren't, they were, it's just there was no evidence to show that they were. I'm trying to simplify their language. As with all decisions that they make, the service has reviewed the outcome of what they said. They've looked at all the information that's been provided and have now formally instructed our contractors to provide photographic evidence, which is date and timed, when showing when any new signs are installed, to ensure that we prevent this issue from happening again. So this is basically where we've listened to the independent advice, we've listened to what they've said, there's a potential, not gap, but there's a potential change that we can make to improve that service, so that should prevent that happening again, or at least having clear photographic evidence to show the signage was in place at the time. And our Highways and Transport Services team seeks to continually improve. So, and as such, we welcome this outcome as it's basically helped us to improve our services, our processes. It's never our intention to wrongly issue penalty charge notices, and following the outcome of the Traffic Penalty Tribunal, we apologise for the inconvenience that it's caused. The review of this case demonstrates that the process, which is in place throughout the country for all councils, works even when the independent part of it forms part of it. parking penalty process, the parking penalty appeals process, these are such long words, is a central government legal process which is not able to be changed by us. Therefore, the benefits of scrutinising this process would, in officers' views, be limited, and any outcomes proposing to amend this process would unlikely to be implementable. So this is where we have to follow the guidance from government in this matter. But I think what we've been able to show here is that, has it gone through the traffic penalty tribunal process, that we've listened to the advice and the guidance and the information they've provided, reviewed what we do, and we've changed our processes as a result of that feedback and as a result of the work you've done taking your PCNs through appeal. So I will make sure that you get a copy of this, and it will be sent to all three of you that have asked the similar questions. And I hope that this answer, albeit very long, has answered all three of the questions that have been made this evening. You are more than welcome to ask any supplementary questions that you'd like from this. And then again, as I said to you earlier, once you've received this, if there's anything you'd like to clarify or any questions you'd like to ask, I'll make sure that I can help to clarify any points that haven't been clearly understood. There's a lot of very long technical expressions in here. So I just want to make sure you have the chance to fully understand what's been said. But that being said, do you have any questions you'd like to ask or supplementary you'd like to ask?
Yes, and a number of other people also received parking penalties in similar conditions to us. They possibly paid up because they weren't, they hadn't got the time. We retired. We've spent hours and days on this. They didn't, they may have paid up for a quiet life. What are you going to do about those people who were wrongly ticketed in the similar circumstances? Because I understand that all along Remenham Lane, the signs were changed late, as they should have been.
I'm going to look in the direction of one of our officers. George, can you pick this up, or is this something you need to look into?
If I can defer to Chris on the screen, he'll be able to help with that, Chair.
Evening. I think thanks for having me. I think obviously we do, as I say, we apologise for the inconvenience this has caused, obviously, these residents. In this instance, as we've mentioned, it is a legal process, and the way to kind of run through that process is to have the ticket either paid for or obviously appealed. They're the only two ways of closing those cases. So in these instances where they have been paid, that instance has now been closed. It's a legal process that we can't open again. So I think, in short, that kind of answers that question. And obviously, as I say, we've kind of gone through that process, listened, understood, and made that change. But it was I think it was the process of not being able to fully prove or disprove that notice was out at that time. And the residents that you're referring to, the additional ones there, again, we can't be certain if they were there before or after that sign. And obviously on this instance, if you're saying some have paid, they've paid. If some haven't and they're through that appeal process, then obviously they'll be dealt with through that same legal process. If that helps.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand that.
Oh, I can't hear anybody.
Okay, they will have to appeal under the vexatious. Yes, okay.
Yeah, it's the same legal process. Yeah, there's two routes to closing it. It's either pay it and it closes, or you appeal and obviously it gets overturned or paid. And obviously if they've paid it, then it has closed. So obviously they've kind of missed their opportunity to kind of appeal it. However, obviously if they are in that process, it will then follow the process that you currently did to come to its natural conclusion.
So those who have copped up have had it?
They can't.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, yes, thank you. And the other question was about the training of your staff, because we received a clear written statement that the witnesses' evidence that we had provided was hearsay, and that came from a letter from WBC. And so clearly there must be some misunderstanding in there about what constitutes evidence.
I haven't seen the evidence that you submitted to hand. Obviously, I've just had the report that came through. But I think as the letter set out, and I'd say I haven't seen the photos that you took to demonstrate whether the signs were there or weren't there. So my understanding what happened is obviously signs were making a change at some point that morning. And I think we believe, well, we understand from you that you parked there before our officers or before our contractor changed that sign. And the bit that we've set out is because of the legal process, our PCN, our CE officers, parking enforcement officers, went to site, and they, just in that snapshot of time, saw the sign, saw the vehicles, took the photo, and that was, so they have followed the correct process. Obviously, they weren't aware when these signs were changed, whether they were after them or before them, but for their photos, when they took that legal photo, it demonstrated that you were parked at that time illegally. So it became a separate matter for us to look at. So those officers had dealt with the process correctly, but obviously there was another issue with our contractor, which isn't the same contractor. So we had the parking officers and we had a contractor that went out to change the signs. Now, clearly they changed the signs and didn't correctly inform the parking team that those signs had been changed and didn't take photos. And that was where we failed with the evidence. So our contractor failed to take that photo. If they had taken that photo and the photo has showed that they went up at 9 o'clock and you were parked at 9:02, then that would have been the evidence that the TPT would have supported and your appeal possibly would have not been successful. Whereas because we didn't have that photo, we couldn't prove that our sign had been put up before you parked there or likewise after you had parked there. And that's on that basis the TPT obviously went with you, which was the correct outcome, I believe, for the fact that we didn't have the photos in place.
Evidence of photos, but surely if people write in stating that they watched and noted the time when the signs were changed, should that not be taken also as evidence rather than be described as hearsay?
Again, it comes down to the legislation, the legal process that we had that took you through and set out in the letter. It's the PCN at that time. Now, I fully understand what you're saying, and obviously we can look at that part of the process, but the evidence in front of the officer who was making that review of your letter saying we'd seen this happen, and the evidence on the file demonstrating your car photographed parked alongside these signs, which had obviously the parking changed, demonstrated at that snapshot in the photo. And that's the piece, that's the bit that we have, or we are learning from, is to make sure that we get those contractor photos which can fully demonstrate. But I understand what you're saying, and I wish we could just listen to residents and say, but we have a lot of residents that say I was parking here, but we can't always believe them because obviously we have evidence that kind of proves against that. So but I do understand what you're saying in this instance.
Independent people living in the area at the time that were saying this. It wasn't our friends. Well, they did say it, but there were independent people living in the area saying that those notices weren't put up till lunchtime. So you didn't see, no one seemed to investigate that, as far as I can see. It was just taken as read that that's what was said.
Yeah, that's correct. And obviously, as we mentioned in the letter, we reached out to our contractor who advised that they had put them up when they told us they had put them up. And so obviously that's where we were kind of caught. It was the evidence between yourselves proving it and us disproving it. And that's why obviously we followed the legislative process that took it through to the TPT, which isn't, I guess, the best outcome for yourself as a resident. But obviously it's the process still that we had to follow.
Last chance, or last question.
Well, as far as I can see, then the only evidence that you take is what the photographic evidence or what the contractors say. And nobody looked at the fact that during the course of correspondence, the contractors sometimes said they were changed on the 8th, sometimes said they were changed on the 9th. Nobody picked that up. I pointed that out, but it was not picked up by Wokingham staff.
And I think what Chris is saying and what the reply says is that the learning from that is more clarity and more evidence from officers. So when our contractors go out and place signage up on the road, in this instance, that in the future photographs will be taken so it has a date and a time stamp. So whilst it's not perhaps the answer that you're looking for, I think what you will see is that the key thing here is that the officers have taken away the information from the TPT, have looked at it. It's not the answer that you want, but the officers have taken that away, have looked at the gap that was highlighted because we didn't have that photographic evidence that said yes or no, and as a result, change in processes. So I think that's, for me, I think is a really good thing and shows that that whole process has worked. It might not be the outcome that you would like, but I think in this case, it was the TPT overturned. We've looked at the processes and changes have been put in which make life better for everyone and clearer for everyone. And as Chris said, if they turn up at 9:02 and the sign was put up at 9 o'clock, there'll be a sign and a photographic date-stamped photo that shows when the signs were put up. But I'd like to thank you for your participation. I'll make sure you get a copy. You'll get a copy of the full reply. But thank you very much for coming.
Mark, can I just say, just one thing in your defence. I think it is fair to say that our process didn't work perfectly well because we didn't realise that we didn't have the documentary evidence, and we didn't look at that, and we allowed it to go to the TPT, which I think is very disappointing. And it'd be also interesting to see what happened to the contractor who's clearly provided misleading information, and what the consequences are to them for all the suffering and anguish that these people have felt.
I think it's a fair observation. Thank you. Keep turning mine off. Right, we will move on, but thank you for your attendance this evening. Do we have any member questions?
No member questions, Chair.
Right, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the medium-term financial plan for 25 to 28, the consolidated update, which is the end of the process that we've been going through for the last few meetings. Graham, I'm looking in your direction. Stephen, Imogen, is there anything you'd like to say first? Imogen?
Yeah, I mean, really, this is, you guys have seen the budget for next year. This is just we got our local government grant on the 19th of December. And this is the updates that we've come up with sort of since that, and it's obviously the result of the budget engagement summary. So we just kind of, let's see what Graham does and answer any questions.
Thanks, Imogen. Yes, sadly, this is the last of the series of the MTFP presentations to ONS. The page 20 sets out the agenda, strategic considerations and risks, which are important to understand. Then goes on to the local government finance settlement that was announced after our last discussion on the budget. Then there's an audit trail of showing what's changed since we first reported to this committee, and then just a few words by way of conclusion. Page 22, I won't go through those that are related to the local government finance settlement. I'll pick those up a little bit later. So I'll drop down to national living wage, national insurance contributions, impact on social care market. You would have heard that from Matt and the team, no doubt, but it's not just the social care market it'll impact on other council providers. So there will be some stresses in the budget as we renew contracts, etc. We still don't know whether we're going to have the national insurance contributions fully reimbursed. We've been told we will, but there may well be a shortfall on that calculation. Worth pointing out that we have, through that audit trail that I'll come to, we arrived at a gap of 3.3 million, whereby ongoing expenditure exceeds ongoing income by £3.3 million, which is funded through 0.5 million general fund, 1.5 million collection fund, 1.3 million town centre reserve. Obviously, I've also presented the reserves to this committee as well. So this shows that we've dipped into those in order to cover the 3.3 million, which isn't an alarmingly high figure and is lower than the previous year.
Could you just repeat which reserves they came up with?
Yes, in the page 22, in brackets, that lists. After drawing off the general fund reserves, we are budgeting for a balance of 10.2 million at March 26. Worth noting that obviously we're setting the budget for 25-26. The following year has a gap of 7.8 million that needs to be addressed, everything else being equal. The level of savings incorporated in the 25-26 budget, next year's, is 7.8 million, which is obviously on top of all the rather significant level of budget savings in previous years' budgets that have been 11 million plus. And then just to complete, the capital programme for 25-26 is fully funded. However, there's a shortfall, which isn't unusual, over the rest of the life of the MTFP, year 2 and 3, totalling also £7.2 million. But the key point is the 25-26 revenue and capital budget is balanced based on this proposal. Over the page to page 24, obviously a lot of interest about the local government finance settlement. A really important point is that it is just for 1 year, and we are currently under consultation for the next year's local government finance settlement, which will be multi-year. And it's absolutely essential that this council puts its case forward, most significantly being it is not just deprivation that drives need and cost for a local authority, and we must deal with the DSG deficit. The next bullet point sets out the core spending power increase, which is substantially our council tax resource. But when we weed out all the core spending grant from the government, which includes additional money for adult social care, additional money for children, when you add up all of those grants, we have minus £1 million from last year. So if we didn't have extra adults and children's monies, then that 1 million would be even higher. The new homes bonus does exist in 25-26, but it's unlikely to exist going forward. We have a new significant grant called the, well, nicknamed the EPRS actually, but it's Extended Producer Responsibility for Packaging, which is to do with a tax on retailers that use plastics instead of biodegradable materials, for example. And that sits outside the comprehensive spending power for now, as in for 25-26. I'm pretty sure it will be incorporated in the comprehensive spending power the year beyond. We will have a grant payment for national insurance, and I've already talked about that, but will it cover the whole cost? And at this point in time, we still have uncertainty over a number of key income streams. For example, we don't know how much the public health grant will go up by, and we can't guarantee the money that flows through the NHS, for example, hospital discharge grants and the like, how much of that comes to Wokingham Borough Council. And some of those figures are quite sizable, but we don't know the answer at this stage. Reassuringly, capital receipts flexibility, the one that allows us to sell a property and turn that capital to revenue up to the sum of expenditure on transformation. So it's approved by council last year. That flexibility has been extended to March 2030, so clearly there is a long-term permission for councils to be able to embrace that. And probably, well, up there with the local government finance settlement multi-year is the issue of dedicated schools grant and the fact that that override still currently expires on the 1st of April 2026, but I'm certain that won't be the case because of the impact it'll have nationally, as well as Wokingham. Page 26 just shows the position of presented at the beginning of October that I brought here in the kicking off this series of events or discussions. Page 27 is the track changes from there. The figure 5458 is not exactly the same as 5503. That was an error that was sorted out, but you'll see that's not the biggest figure on the page. The first tranche that gets us from 5503 to 6008, or 6,008,000, these are changes that have taken place from the initial presentation. So the first one is a requirement to set the building control budget correct, in that it's a highly regulated service, and the level of statutory and non-fee earning work is higher now, yes, bless you, than previously assumed in the budget. So we have to reset that budget safe and correct to recognise the level of fee earning and non-fee earning. So I don't believe we have any choice, because it's an unsafe budget to assume otherwise. The next line is a reduction in the saving, although it calls it bid type saving. The fact it's a growth adds to the gap, is in recognition of the fact that it reduces the saving that was previously presented here under P&G. The same is, then we have the residence parking scheme. This recognises the fact it's not possible to implement in 2025-6, and therefore that recognises that saving is not achievable. And the Coroner's Court was actually presented here, but it was presented here after we'd calculated the 5458. So to create a balanced audit trail, we've added the Coroner's Court cost increase there to get to 6008. Then it's about the other aspects that have happened, and you have been told about the impact of the national minimum wage. What we haven't done at this meeting is calculated the lowest possible increase we can get to without creating what will clearly be an unsafe budget. So this is adding another £1.7 million in, which doesn't cover all of the impacts of national minimum wage and national insurance, but recognises there's a challenge to negotiate within an overall envelope. Takes us to a rather concerning gap at that stage of 7.7 million, which gets worse as we bring in the £1 million core grant reduction, but then gets better as we bring in the EPRS. We also bring in an efficiencies line for place and growth. We do not increase the DSG contribution in 25-26, so that's simply not adding an extra 1% contribution to that. But it doesn't take away what's gone on before, it just doesn't add to the 1%, another 1% increase. And then it introduces the use of capitalisation flexibility, which is having a plan of asset disposals and being able to use £1 million a year to turn or to achieve at least £1 million a year of capital to revenue. The amount we spend on transformation is in the region of £3.5–4 million. So that is not a risk, but the risk is obviously achieving that pipeline of asset disposals. And obviously this isn't for 1 year only, this is about having an ongoing programme of selling assets and turning them into revenue. That arrives at the 3314, which is covered off in the way that I've previously set out. Turning over the page is all of that incorporated into a new revised MTFP, arriving at 0 at the bottom. If you look at the DSG deficit recovery, it puts that to 0, but leaves the following years in place. There are also some, I'd say, relatively minor changes on the special items, and that's all in the area of children's services. With the draft local government finance settlement came some very clear and ambitious expectations on children's services about what now becomes a statutory expectation. And a modest grant of 231,000, or that was the addition in that CSP calculation. We received an extra 231 called prevention and intervention. So this proposes that to the tune of that figure that we received in the comprehensive spending power grants line, we bring that in as additional money, one-off, so that we can understand better the impact and consequences and costs of that, and also bring forward the helping earlier MAMA work from 27-28. It's all of the same thing, addressing that enhanced statutory expectation, which is quite onerous. And then it sets out the new level of special items. The conclusion, and this would be based on these proposals, these will be in my Chief Finance Officer's report that goes to Council. This budget isn't irresponsible in that it's got loads of big savings items that are unachievable and it's set up knowing we're going to fail. It isn't that at all, but it does include risks and challenges in there, which of course, not least, incorporates the 7.5 million savings challenge on top of the savings challenges we've got this year and in previous years. The future funding I've talked about, that is huge for Wokingham because we're seen as an extreme authority in terms of where we are positioned in measures of deprivation, most notably, and also resource. So it's hard to see how that's going to go well for us. It's about us doing all we can to mitigate against the size of the negative impact. DSG is formally off balance sheet, whatever that means. The deficit, of course, has to be funded by the council taxpayer as we borrow or use internal balances to do that. But it is considered to be an area of expenditure that should sit just with the DSG and with the DFE and not with the council taxpayer. It was never the intention that it should be brought into those overall considerations. It was stated in the autumn statement that the DSG issue would be resolved with the local government finance settlement, but the draft was completely silent on it, which obviously isn't overly helpful. As stated, really importantly, we have a balanced revenue and capital budget in the context of it being responsible and safe, achievable. And yes, currently I would say Wokingham Borough Council, we are in a generally sound financial position, particularly in the national context. So it is a budget I would feel comfortable supporting and putting forward. The next page is maybe I'll take a break then, because if it's up to you, Chair, because then we go into the budget engagement summary.
Great. Before I go to Pauline, usual comments apply if you're. Thank you. Usual comments apply. So if you're going to make a comment on something, can you just make sure you give us the page reference so we all know where we are, and give us a few seconds for everyone to get onto the same page. We've gone through all of the major budget items in the last few minutes, so I think if we can focus the attention on the changes that Graham has been through this evening, as opposed to going back over what's been already discussed. And then at the end of this, what I'd like to try and do is just wrap up and get a consolidated view or overall feedback on all of this item to pass forward. But just before I pass over to Pauline, I'd just like to thank publicly Graham and all of your team for all of the work over the last well, over the whole process, but in particular since the local government finance settlement with all of the changes that's brought. Huge piece of work. I think we're all grateful for the amazing amount of work that's gone into kind of getting this budget to where we are now. And I just wanted to pass on my thanks and hopefully the thanks of the whole committee for all of the work that's been done for that. And that being said, Pauline first, then Peter.
Thank you, Graham. I've got a few questions. Firstly, I'd like to agree with you. It's very disappointing to see the government taking £1 million off us when we're the lowest funded authority, but one, or at least maybe always the lowest funded completely in the country. That I don't think was what we signed up to during the general election, but that is how it is. So, questions for you. First one is the EPRP, the 2.449 million. Where does the government get the money from for that, and what do we have to do for it? Is the first question. If I give you them all, then you
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. The second. Do you want me to go a bit slow? Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
The second question was last year. The government gave us, because of the cancellation of HS2, the extension, they gave us a road fund of 12 million over 10 years. I believe the first 2 years were funded and the rest of them were not funded at that point. Have we got this year's tranche of that? And will we get anything next year? What's happened to it? The third question was about the DSG. I recognise that it's off the balance sheet, and if it was on the books, then everybody would be in trouble, and most people a lot more than us. But I'm worried about the interest payments on that, which are not off the balance sheet. Maybe you'd like to comment on that, and maybe we could persuade the government to keep the interest in the same pot as the issue is, rather than giving it to us. If I understand the reserves correctly, you're intending to take a small amount out of reserves to fund the deficit this year. But if I've understood these figures right, you're then intending to take 2 million more next year and another 1.5 million the year after. Is there any plan to do something with that? And whilst we're on that subject, I think it would be useful, and maybe I could do it myself, but maybe you'll have it to hand, to just explain over the last 3 years the way the reserves have moved, because I believe last year you put money into reserves. I think it was a couple of million. The year before you took money out, I think it was about 3 million, if I remember right. It'd be nice to just refresh my memory about how we're doing in terms of feeding the reserves and then taking money out. And I'm particularly worried about 26, 27 and 27, 28, because it sounds like it's becoming a bit of a habit. Given that, I understand what's going on. So those are my major questions, I think.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And I'll tell you what. I'll start with DSG and reserves, and then EPRS. I will hand over to George if that's okay. But I'll say a few words of introduction and then homeschool transfer. Maybe if we, and actually, yeah, being as George is primed and ready to go. EPRS, I will hand over to George, there are risks around EPRS in that we have been given a clear allocation for 25-26 and we will receive that. So that is not unsafe. We've looked at the costs arriving in 25-26 and we haven't identified anything, and this is, and if there is anything, it will be pretty minor, and we've discussed this with other local authorities as well, and we're taking a fairly consistent view, which is it is money available in 25-26. There's minimum cost expected.
So it's an option, is it? You don't have to take it.
No. We receive it. Every local authority that's responsible for either or waste collection or waste disposal receives an EPRS payment, and we've been told what we're going to get. What becomes more difficult to know going forward beyond 25-26 is the amount of money that we receive, because it comes effectively through a tax on retailers that use packaging that is not environmentally friendly, which falls on us to deal with as a local authority. What isn't clear is how that income stream of taxation continues, because obviously it's intended to drive behaviour change. With behaviour change will come a smaller penalty and therefore a smaller receipt. Also, it will almost certainly be incorporated into the core spending power calculation, and we don't know what that means. If that happens, does that change that figure to a large extent, everything else being equal? And we need to understand better the expenditure side, and it's particularly that, but by all means, anything else you want to add, George? But that's the bit that I'm least clear on going forward.
Graham, you've said it all. I think the only addition to add is that issue, which is what will be the arse of government against that budget, and I think those in the room know in terms of simpler recycling and issues that will come into force next year, for example, curbside glass collection. So there'll be an expectation of some of these funds being used for other purposes. That's not entirely clear at this point in time, and we're flagging that up as a key risk as we go through our procurement exercise at the moment in terms of that new waste contractor. So there are significant risks.
So how's it allocated at the moment? How do they work out what we get?
Well, it's quite a complicated formula, which includes deprivation, but also how rural the borough is. So I haven't got the list in front of me. There's quite a lot of criteria in terms of what you go through. So I was trying to think of I think West Berkshire were 3 or 4 million, quite more than us, given their rurality. So, yeah, quite a complicated formula.
Just add a very, very brief little footnote to this. It's been covered pretty exhaustively by Graham and George, but essentially, as you probably getting by now, this is a sum of money we're getting this year, basically a tax on those who aren't using the appropriate materials. We can reasonably expect behaviour will change in response to that tax. People will start behaving differently, so the income would fall anyway. But if they fold this into the core revenue settlement, which they're likely to do, we will definitely end up with less.
Not the benefit. Yeah.
We'll end up with a lot less. So there's absolutely no guarantee beyond this year that we'll get very much at all from this. So we should view this largely as, I think, a one-off, and assume that whatever we get thereafter is a bonus, but not likely to be very much.
Does any of it come from the plastic bag charge?
I think I don't think it does. I think it's more about the packaging costs. So it's the bottles of Coke or cans of Coke and the cost that it takes to put those back in the system rather than plastic bags. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's a penny or two connected with that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So what's been said about the EPR is absolutely correct. So for the forthcoming financial year, it's an indicative allocation. Then that's subject to review. So that was based on work by DEFRA of waste outputs and recycling rates and tonnages to landfill done some years ago. We're currently in dialogue with DEFRA about that, because obviously we brought through the service transformation, which will change those sort of outcomes and tonnages and recycling rates significantly, and we're asking for that to be considered, and then the sort of the future works that we all know about going through the procurement and how that will be considered. So indicative for now, and then subject to change positively or negatively in the future based on some of those outcomes and discussions that we're finalising with DEFRA now, and through the larger organisations like the LGA and the DEPT as well.
So if our recycling percentage increases, does that make the number likely to increase or decrease?
Sounds from Steve as that could be better.
It would have an impact, same as the tonnage, but the overall formula is based on sort of averages of family groups of authorities. So we're based on like sort of a Solihull and a Northampton. So there's lots of sort of smoothing out and understanding of that, and it is a complicated formula. So we're in discussion with DEFRA nationally about working through that, and we're responding on some of the issues. So that picture will change.
Can I perhaps suggest that once we get some clarity at a future date on what that might look like and all of the smoothing out of everything, that a simple update for the committee, maybe just a written update or a simple summary of what it is. I also just want to pick up the difference between indicative and what Graham said, and just confirming, although if it's indicative, is it actual?
Is it real?
Is it real? Is it that's the amount of money we're going to get, or is it indicative? It's not confirmed.
I can clarify. The figure that I've got in these papers is the figure we will receive for 25-26. When Steve was saying indicative, I think he was recognising that the future calculation may well change, and we're starting at least with a figure in year one.
That's fine. I just wanted to be. You start hearing words. Imogen, and I'll come back to Pauline if you want.
So I think Graham had several other answers. So
no, it's on the same. I think it's on the same topic.
All it is that this is the number we've got for this year. What we don't know about next year and the year after, that we'll find out, and hopefully we can talk about that at a different time and place. Yeah.
Just to bring those two elements together, Graham is absolutely correct. The figure that we've got is the figure that we've got. The indicative, the use of the word indicative is because we're in discussions with DEFRA, and that discussion is, do you understand the allocation work? Does it feel right? Are there any issues you would like to raise, such as the service transformation? So in the future it will change. So it's indicative in that sense, but correct for the purposes of the paper.
Thank you. Graham, back to you for the other questions.
Thank you, Chair. So the next question was the HS2 and the money that was allocated or indicated to be available for local authorities. We have, in all of our capital resourcing, have put in the grants allocations that have been confirmed, whereas those that are more speculative and possible are not included in the resourcing. And I think HS2 will fall into both those brackets. There was something early doors, let's say, that we could include in the resourcing, and then there was a speculative possible amount that we would get, and that isn't. So I think it's a combination of both. But that's our approach. We only put in into our resourcing calculation where we feel confident and it's been committed by the government, as opposed to something that may be on its way. Obviously, if they come through and we have no expenditure pressures that offset anywhere else in the council's budget, then that will help bridge towards bridging that £7.2 million gap over year 2 and 3. Yes? Oh, yep. Right, DSG interest payment. Yeah, the DSG growing deficit is of considerable concern, even though it is formally termed as off-balance sheet. The interest charge, whether it's borrowing, so that's about 5%, or lost investment income, because we're using our cash balances, about 5%. That 5% on the total deficit falls on the council taxpayer. And next year, I think we'll be getting towards £2 million, which is rather sizable, and we know the trajectory is just going upwards. We're not alone. It's well, I would say it's emerging. It's been emerging over the past few years, but I think it's on everyone's radar now. So the DFE, MHCLD, the Treasury, the Cabinet Office, they're all aware of this issue, both in terms of the escalating DSG deficit, the description of the broken system, and the interest payment that's falling on local authorities. I'm just hoping that in the final settlement, that clarification and a resolution is given, and actually the solution that you propose there, Pauline, as a short-term measure is exactly what I would recommend. If this is too difficult, at least make it all ring-fenced and off-balance sheet, which includes the interest. Whereas it seems a contradiction as off-balance sheet, yet the interest falls on the council taxpayer. And actually, Stephen has written to the MHC, the Chancellor, and the MHCLG, yes, to point this out, and we are waiting for a response both to the letter, but also to the supposed resolution that was claimed to follow from the autumn statement.
I was going to say, Imogen wants to ask, I think, add something to the DSG piece.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a problem that's affecting all councils, not us, not just us, rather. And the interest being paid out is paid out of revenue. Council taxpayers here are paying that interest payment. Lots of councils have highlighted this as an issue that's an ongoing, and I think when they started this, they thought that the measures put in place would fix the problem or do something more to resolve it, and it clearly hasn't, and it needs to be looked at on a wider, it's bigger than what we are, so it needs to be looked at and fixed on a much bigger scale than here.
Yeah, I think the thing that bothers me particularly about it is it's a bill we've got and we've got absolutely no control over it. That's the worst thing. If we had some control and responsibility for it, it would be a lot better. But having no control, no responsibility, and just a bill is a bit unfair.
It is. I think we're in complete agreement on that. I think what's required is a radical look at how we deal with this problem. I mean, you could obviously continue the statutory override, and I'm fairly confident they will, because if they don't, half the councils in England will fall over very quickly. 2/3 of them fall over fairly quickly. So I think it's in the interest of the government to maintain the statutory override, but that doesn't solve the problem of the interest payments. And it is ultimately, even writing off the debt won't help, because it'll just gradually accumulate again. So we have to get to the root cause of the problem, which is the system does not work, and it needs radical reform.
We are failing children, particularly children with special needs. I mean, that's the root of what this is all about. There's not enough funding and measures in place to keep the costs under control and to provide the services that we need to these children.
Not helped by the sclerotic speed of delivery of the new schools that we've been promised.
No, that most definitely does not help, and unfortunately, there seems to be both a will on one part. The same department both grants us the money and puts obstacles in the way of our being able to deliver the schools that they've funded. So it is a very big problem at the moment. But I think everyone recognises there needs to be a wholesale reform of the system. But I think actually grasping the nettle and doing it is really very difficult.
I think. Oh, sorry. Was there an?
Yes, there was.
Lost track. Sorry.
That's all right. So that's DSG done. Right, on to reserve. This is a very complex question in many ways, which is why we produced this reserves paper and presented it early in October. So I can't give it full justice in the response I'm going to give, but I'll give it a go. Page 28 shows that in 22-23, sorry, that's actually should be 23-24, the budget gap was 4769. So when we set the budget for this year, we had a budget gap that was brought forward of 4769. That budget gap that then carries forward based on setting 25% reduces to 3314, everything else being equal. So it's taken 1.4 million off of the ongoing challenge. Obviously, if we managed to take 1.4 off the ongoing challenge, by 3 years we'd be down to 0, everything else being equal. We also know that in the papers I presented that certainly compared with most other local authorities, our balances are in reasonably good health, but we also know that we have high levels of borrowing, high levels of risk, and therefore we need to guard against those as well. This budget being proposed will enable me to say this is a safe budget and it's affordable. The fact that that 4769 hasn't gone the other way and started growing up to 6 million, for example, gives me reassurance. It's going the right way. And also the fact that the budgets that we've put forward, for example, increasing the adult social care budget, for example, the level of savings targets are 7 million and not 70 million. They all give me confidence that it's a reasonable, realistic budget that is achievable. And I am acutely aware that some authorities set a nice balanced budget and say even their reserves have improved magnificently, but it's based on, wishful thinking was the word, savings targets that just there is no plan or realism to achieve, and indeed expenditure budgets that are impossible to stay within. That was a reasonably lengthy response, but it still doesn't do the whole question justice. And really, I would refer you to the report that was written at the beginning of October that you received in the context of these changes, which I would say is quite modest. The 3 million, so what did I say? 500,000 was from general fund balance, which allows general fund balance to land at £10.2 million, 1.5 million from the collection fund, which still leaves 2 million in the collection fund, but obviously, and things change, and 1.3 million town centre reserve, which would still leave about 5 million in the town centre.
I think what I'm looking for, and I don't expect to get it now, and it'd be useful maybe to get it later, is a view of the total reserves last year, this year, and the projection for next year and the year after, if these budgets are right, just to make sure that we're not doing that, but in fact are doing this, which is what reserves are for. Reserves are there for rainy days. I mean, we spent some of the reserves on COVID. I remember it distinctly. I remember getting criticised for it. But that's what reserves are for. Reserves are for dealing with the unexpected and the unknown. I mean, you can see that the Labour government taking £1 million off our budget was probably unexpected and unknown. It might have been expected, I don't know, but it was certainly something that you shouldn't necessarily have expected because the funding's actually gone down. But I think I'd like to get some reassurance over the future.
Okay, I know Stephen wants to come in, but I just want to start with so dipping into reserves is a 3 million. 0.5 million we're saying comes with general fund, which leaves the general fund at 10.2 million. That is not a cliff edge, or 1.5 million collection fund leaves the collection fund. So you could say that's 1.5 million out, and 1.3 million from the town centre. How the whole picture of reserves moves is very complex because these are only just single points of vision. The intention of the paper that I bring to this committee every year is to do that thing and bring it all in around. But in terms of incremental, there isn't anything alarming going on here, as I've set out. But that whole view will bring to inform next year's budget setting process.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. It's just the 3 to 5 to 6 just worries me a little bit, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. But I'm quite happy to wait till we get to that point and we can have a look at the actual figures rather than trying to guess them.
I just wanted to comment on the rainy day. Yes, you're right. And of course, it was raining in 22, 23, when you, for understandable reasons, had to take money out. But obviously, it's been raining a fairly heavy way since. You could say we've had a tropical storm since, with that rising demand for services, need for services, inflation, which was obviously particularly acute in the course of 22 and into 23, but still is baked into the system, is still costing us additional monies every year. Those earmarked reserves that it's safe to release some of, because either the risk that they're there to mitigate is reduced, or we don't need the quantity to cover off the risk. So we've tried to do a calculated and safe release of earmarked reserves to supplement and keep at a good level our general fund balance. So it is a difficult task, and it's a constant balancing act. But I think I'm very confident in Graham's ability and the ability of our finance team to be able to handle this. And it's just worth remembering that the long list and growing list of councils that have gone into 114 measures compared with the situation we're in.
Yeah, no, I accept that. I think it could be a lot worse. Let's put it that way. But there are some of the reserves that we were intending to refill, having taken money out of it. Like we took money out of the re-3 re-evaluation reserve in order to pay for the wheelie bins, and then we're meant to be putting money back in that to deal with the re-3 re-evaluation at the end. So I'll be interested to see whether that reserve is being refed or not, and how those savings are running forward. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I found the reserves report very interesting. Thank you.
Peter.
Pauline stole my question. I was going to be asking about the EPRP and what we had to do for that money, but that was answered earlier. Thank you.
Dave.
Just following on from what Pauline said, I think what we want really is reassurance that if the reserves obviously a finite position, that we're not losing money each year and the cliff is in front of us, and we prefer to put the brakes on before we got right to the edge of the cliff, rather than gradually walking closer and closer over a period of the next few years.
We might need binoculars to see it at the moment, but yeah.
That's right.
Thanks, Dad. I think we'll, unless there's any other questions, move on to the next bit. What I wanted to add, just myself, on the use of reserves is from the networks and groups that I'm connected with and people I still talk to. Our financial position as an authority at this moment in time, with the use of available reserves, capitalisation or turning capital into revenue, we're in a much stronger position than many equivalent councils across the country. We should be grateful for that, and that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact, and what's the reserve question we need to look at. I wouldn't want people to think that actually we are in a horrendous position compared to our cohort. And when you look at other councils of equivalent size, actually what we are seeing is the sensible use of reserves for emergencies, etc., for everything else. And I just wanted that point made again with my thanks, and I'll go to Imogen just for a final comment. But we are in a position that many other councils would look at with envy is probably the wrong word, but it's the right direction. But we are in a sound place, and I'm grateful to Graham and the team, and for Imogen for all the work you've done over the last few weeks and months on this as well. But final word on Imogen, then we'll move forward to the next section, unless I've missed it.
I mean, yes, of course, with the reserves, we do need to be wary, because you can only use them once. Yes. We are in a good place. We have a reasonable amount of reserves. And as I'd say, yes, we are in an enviable position compared to most councils. But obviously, don't forget, we've got devolution coming along, and we're not quite sure how that will affect us, because it will change the balance of everything. And it's quite a worrying thing, because we are solvent, working, but what happens there are councils around us who are not, who are in trouble, and that is something we do need to consider. And Stephen's now got to want to say something.
No, just that we're very popular with the other councils at the moment. Yes. They'd all quite like to be pally with us.
Yeah, that's worrying me,
that. It is a bit worrying, actually, yes. But yeah, I mean, it's important that we've done well this year. This year's looking okay. but obviously down the road, and particularly if anything happens with the DSG and things like this, it could all be rather different.
I would say it's a nice position to be in where Wokingham is wanting to be pals of everybody, or where everybody wants to be pals with Wokingham. That's quite a considerable turnaround. Graham, do you want to move on to the next piece, and then we'll do a wrap up and then capture any other comments back from anybody?
Yeah, just given time, I'll be very brief on this. So this is the budget engagement. It's good practice to engage, albeit we did it fairly late in the day, and it was in some ways, well, it was far from extensive. It was deliberately short, so there was only 2 or 3 questions, but we wanted to get a flavour back. Only 276 responded, which really takes me more significantly to the next page and about the proposals for future budget engagement. Obviously, I'm not an expert on consultation. I'm sure you knew that. But Dave Allen obviously is very closely involved in this and will be taking this enhanced approach forward. It sets out the importance of early engagement, use of community panel, subject to the funding bid that's in place, drip-fed and targeted communications campaigns, and a kind of a package really, rather than this which. And I know many authorities try hard to get budget engagement, and the numbers aren't great. But the way of enhancing those numbers are as set out in those proposals, also involving community groups and the business sector as well. So that page sets out the fact that this wasn't the greatest budget consultation exercise and the biggest response, but we do want to improve how we do that, and this sets out how we want to do that. The responses that come back are, obviously you've got the pie charts, and then there's the page 36, gives a little a narrative of summarising those responses. So support to increasing fees and charges to protect services, with just over half of the respondents, 53% or 152, supportive or neutral. Same again on question 2. Question 2, there was general support for the statement of investing in ways to control costs and generate income, 76% or 208 supportive or neutral. Obviously, there's more text that I'm sure you've read, but that was the sentiment that came back from, albeit a restricted participation.
Thank you. Just before I go to Peter, I've got one. I'll go first, or mine, actually, if that's okay. Oh, do you know what? If you're going to be like that, after you. No, in all seriousness, go first.
That's fine. Thank you, Chair. We spent quite a long time talking budgets. It's a complex process. It's incredibly difficult to engage with people who haven't spent hours and hours reading documents, understanding the past and the future. I mean, the first question I've got really is, I'm assuming because you've got such a poor response to the first consultation, you're going to completely discount the answers. You shouldn't be considering them at all. They're statistically completely insignificant, so you shouldn't be using those. So hopefully you'll discount that. The kind of point I'm trying to make is, what value are you going to get from budget consultation on such a complex subject and topic that's meaningful and gets a good enough response? First of all, you should be setting minimum response numbers to ensure that it is statistically significant what you get back, and it's not going to be skewed by a small group of highly motivated people with a particular opinion. So before you do the next consultation, if you do, and I don't personally believe it's good use of council's money, if you are going to do another consultation, you need to set those minimum numbers of responses that you need to get in order to get something that's meaningful and useful. But I do say, you know, it's a complex area. I don't think you're going to get anything meaningful it's not a good use of the council's money.
Thank you for that, Chairman. Right, on the point of whether I discount what's presented here or not, that's not for me to do, one way or the other. I understand your point about, what's it called, statistical significance? Yeah, and I have no doubt this would fail that threshold based on a population of 181,000. However, it's just presented to those involved in setting the budget of this is what we did and this is what came back. It doesn't mean, therefore, we do all these things or not. It's just one part of intelligence from a plethora of other intelligence that you have. And it would be wrong for me not to give it to you. But I'm not giving it to you as a truth, as a statistical relevance. I'm giving it to you in this is what I found. And just actually the fact that only 276 response tells us something as well. So the extent to which this is taken into account in either changing or reassuring, changing bids or reassuring ourselves or informing future is for the politicians in the room to determine, but I'm presenting this as 276 people. And budget consultation is it seemed to be a very poor practice if you don't at least try to consult with the public. And I completely agree, it is really difficult to get informed, well-informed feedback, commentary on the budget because of its complexity. But there are ways of going about it, and they involve sitting down, talking, workshops, maybe choices between things. So there are ways of constructing better conversations and generating better feedback, but I'll be lying if I said no matter how much time we put into workshops and presentations to explain, and not only is it difficult and complex, it's going to be skewed by individual circumstances. So there will be things that are highly valuable to some, but might be statutory, and that's a difficult thing as well. A lot of our services are statutory, but actually a relatively small percentage of the population uses those high cost services. So, yeah, sorry. I guess in many ways I'm agreeing with you, but I'm not agreeing to the fact that we should ditch budget consultation. We need to just try to find better ways of doing it. And, of course, it is only one form of intelligence.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The danger of running a consultation, as you say, and taking the information as an input into the process, if you don't follow what perhaps the majority say within that, then it makes the council look like it's not listening to the residents. We've had this before in the past. I mentioned, the refuse collection, surveys and stuff, where, the outcome of that wasn't directly followed necessarily. So, we've got to be careful doing consultations just for the sake of feeding into a process. If we completely ignore what comes through that, then it makes the council look like we're not listening to residents.
This is my cue to come in, Peter. I think we need to distinguish between a discussion on budget consultation, where I have a lot of sympathy with what you're saying. It's very difficult to get people to engage in any meaningful way for all the reasons Graham said. And the issue of consultations generally. I think we can improve upon the way we consult. But there is one fundamental principle that underlies consultation that I think is not widely understood. Consultation isn't a popularity test. It's not about, do you like this or not like it? It's, are there things that we haven't considered that we should be considering, about, but we don't know about, that have not been taken into account in the decision-making process. So this is about qualitative as much as, in fact, far more than quantitative. And I think it's if I could give you an analogy on something where we consult regularly and very frequently, planning applications. We have to, there's a statutory obligation to consult. 1,000 people could object to an application, but just say, I don't like it. And that wouldn't carry anywhere near as much weight as one person objecting and say, this is why I object. This is something you haven't considered that needed to be considered. That carries far more weight. So if we view this much more as a kind of qualitative exercise to get out things that even our excellent officers haven't considered in their assessment of the pros and cons, then it has value. But it only really has value if we can reach a lot of people, including those people who don't traditionally respond to our consultations. We do know there's a kind of cohort of people who respond, who are generally, unsurprisingly, people who have got some more time and are often retired, and they're interested in things. They're often interested in things not changing. We do know that there's a certain cohort that is very well represented in our consultations. But we also know, especially from our work on the community vision, that unless you go out and engage with those groups that don't regularly engage, you never hear their voice at all. And their voice can be different. It can suggest a completely different set of priorities, a different approach. And we're only ever going to be able to consult effectively if we can have truly representative consultation. So we've got all elements within our community having a chance for their perspective on an issue to be heard. So I think this is an immensely complex issue. I can offer you some reassurance that Dave and his comms team are working on a consultation strategy. I'm hoping we're going to see that come forward, have the light of day fairly soon, and then we'll have the chance to consider that and think about ways in which we might want to see it improved or calibrated. I think we've got to have a calibrated response depending on the nature of the consultation, the seriousness of the issue. You can't have the same level of response for every form of consultation, otherwise it will be vastly resource hungry.
Imogen.
Yeah, Stephen sort of said a lot of the things I wanted to say, but it's important to consult with people, to get them to have their say on what they think this budget means and what is important, where our priorities should be. I mean, if we look at here, it says a summary of comments on question 1, we asked them what areas should be increased for fees and charges and got them to prioritise them in a simple way that most people could understand. And it talks about parking charges, leisure activities and things like this. And it's useful in that respect that we are getting feedback from people which we can use to demonstrate actually if we have to make a decision that is unpopular, increasing fees and charges, these are the places that what we believe, you know, supporting the most vulnerable is our priority. These areas, if we have to put the fees up, are the areas that we should be looking at. And it is important to ask people, and that's what we've done here. But I understand the level of detail that they, you know, that we go through to look at this budget, that they're not going to have that, but we still need to ask them. So, yeah.
I'll move us on in the interest of time. You've covered some of my points. Serve you. Thank you. What I would say is, I know that if you decouple the two parts of this, which is the budget consultation from consultations in general, as Stephen said, we've discussed this at previous meetings, and I look forward to the strategy. I think when you look at some of the answers to some of the questions that have come up, you know, where can you raise more money from? You've got planning applications. Well, we can't change that. I think most councils would dearly love to be able to increase the price of planning applications, but we can't. It's the same with licensing fees, but we can only go to the level that are set by.
I think we might get the chance to increase planning.
No, sorry, but sorry, I meant not planning. I meant licensing fees. My apologies. I've got planning issues in my head today and licensing issues. But when it comes to things like licensing fees, we can't. We're set by how much we can, and we're limited by how much we can. And I think the point I was trying to make is that some of the issues that people have come back with are issues that actually we don't have a huge amount of control over what we can set as a maximum. Sorry, just to be clear, I meant licensing, not planning. It's quite warm this side tonight. So I think my point with budget consultation, and I've seen it done in different places by different councils, 200 isn't great, but also neither is it atrocious. I've seen councils with significantly less than 200 on a much more complicated budget consultation. I look across the border into Bracknell Forest, and they've just done a whole roadshow of consultations. It'd be quite interesting to see what level of engagement they had back. It was 15 odd events around the entire borough, evenings, weekends, different places. I agree. So I think what I'm trying to say is I think I'd be really interested to see what the actual consultation process looks like, or the consultation proposal looks like. I think in Bracknell we used in the past when I was there representative panels that were demographically matched, demographically appropriate, but the cost of doing that is huge. And I think what I also like to see when we get that part through is making sure that even if we're not getting a budget consultation which lots of people responds to, actually part of it is the education of when things go into the budget, what does that mean and why are we doing this and why are we limited in what it is, and to make sure that residents actually get that background knowledge of things that they can go and research or look at that says actually licensing fees would be an obvious one to increase, but you can't because of X, Y and Z, or burial fees, yes, you can increase it by X, Y and Z, but the impact is X, Y and Z. So I think I'd be looking forward to seeing that proposal come forward. And sorry, yes, I meant licensing fees, not planning fees. But thank you for this. Any other questions? If not, we'll move on. And I just final wrap up of the budget section on this. Is there any other overarching points that people want to make that we haven't covered off at length this evening? If anything comes up in people's minds, just circulate it around. And again, I think just to reiterate my thanks to everybody for their engagement tonight, the officers for all the work they've done and for all the questions. It's the end of a long process, and how many weeks till we probably start the next one? But thank you for that. And but thank you for that. And if there's nothing else, we'll move on. You're more than welcome to stay for the rest of this, but I would imagine you'd like to leave. Yeah, never let it be said you weren't offered the chance. Right, we will move on now to the next item, which is looking at the playing pitch strategy. This is an item that's been moved around on the agenda for the last couple of meetings. Delighted to actually see it here. Looking forward to this. Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I haven't got a badge, so I'm Mark Ashwell, Executive Member for Sport and Leisure. And I'm sure we all understand that sport and leisure directly links to our positive health and well-being. And this playing pitch strategy is vitally important as an enabler, not least in unlocking substantial funding from developers' contribution and national sports associations. The team here tonight is George, Director of Places and Growth, Steve Brown, Assistant Director of Places and Growth, and Andy Glencross, who's behind that screen somewhere, and will give us a wave, who's Head of Environmental Services. There he is. Before I ask Andy to take us through our playing pitch strategy, Chair, that's all right. Could I make a... I know, what's going on? Oh, it's the bird. Andy, it's your bird distracting everybody there, look. Could I make a point of order, please? And it's quite a serious point of order as well. Last time out, Andy reported to this committee, he found himself on a political social media video recorded from this meeting. In my opinion, for overview and scrutiny to work effectively cross-party, this should not happen. An officer reporting to this committee should not be exposed to being part of a party political broadcast. Anyway, with that in mind, and without prejudice, I hand over to Andy, Head of Environmental Services, to take us through our playing pitch strategy. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Chair. I've got a short presentation, which I'm going to really whip through because I'll provide the slides that can go out with the minutes. But I just thought I'd take us through to give you not only the what a playing pitch strategy is and what it isn't, but also some of the highlights of what we found out. So if I can just get my presentation up, I should be able to present it to you. If you could let me know when you can see it, that would be helpful.
Yep,
all okay?
Looks good.
Excellent. Let's just do the slideshow. Slideshow. Beginning. Right. Excellent. So just to give you a quick update on what a playing pitch strategy actually is. I mean, the key thing on this slide is it's an assessment of the current and future needs of sports facilities, and it's done to Sport England set out methodology. It covers football, rugby, cricket, tennis, netball, bowls, and rounders and softball. And it should provide us with an evidence base to support the development of appropriate planning policies and standards, and to provide us with a robust rationale for investment decisions. It will improve our ability to secure funding from Sport England, the Football Foundation, and many other sports governing bodies. On the other side of that, it's undertaken as an assessment. It's an assessment of the quantity and quality of outdoor sports facilities. It's done through direct engagement with local sports clubs, and its engagement with the national governing bodies as well. And it should articulate both the current provision and the needs which can then be projected forward using the ONS data for our predicted population growth up to 2040. So it's very much aligned with the local plan update. What it's not. So it's not a strategy aimed at increasing participation rates, for instance. It's not, strictly speaking, a strategy aimed at delivering public health outcomes, although it will enable them. You look at promoting participation rates, that's generally done by the national governing bodies through the affiliated clubs. Most of the opportunities to participate in sport within the borough are through those affiliated clubs, which are almost entirely run by volunteers and parents. And it is worth noting that the lead body nationally on public health benefits in sport is, of course, Sport England, and they, of course, set out the methodology for doing it. They obviously see a playing pitch strategy an important component of reaching those objectives. Key findings. It won't surprise many of you to hear that football is by far the most popular sport. It has more clubs and people playing than all the other sports put together. You'll see the numbers there. It is worth noting that the things are changing in sport, and there are more women and girls football teams now than any other sport as well. So that is something that has changed since we last did this audit, and the idea that girls play netball and boys play football, which was true when I was at school, is no longer true. The need for all facilities going forward is also likely to be affected by the predicted 15% reduction in under 16s between now and 2040, which is according to the ONS population data. Key findings. There's very limited demand for additional facilities for cricket, hockey, rugby, netball and bowls, especially in the future. There is demand for 8 new full-size artificial grass pitches, and there are currently demand for circa about 9 adult grass pitches for football. Although there is predicted to be a surplus of junior pitches by 2040 because of that ONS data. This is the sort of identified strategy, high-level strategy that we're proposing at the moment for delivering against that need. And you'll see by that the dark green ones are where we're trying to make sure that the developers and the developments that are coming forward are bearing the cost of that infrastructure as much as possible. And that's the end of my presentation, and I'll stop sharing and allow you to come up with some questions.
Pauline first, then Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark knows these questions already because we've already had several discussions during the day on this. It was a very interesting read. Thank you very much. There's a couple of questions.
Yep.
I notice in quite a few of the pitches that you're talking about, you're saying that the provision of facilities is not protected because you've got no guarantee they're going to be available in future. Now, I understand that with the private schools where they're nothing to do with the council, but there's quite a lot of those in public schools and academies, and I just wondered, was there anything that we could do to try and increase the amount of confidence in the ability of the public to use some of these facilities out of hours? Because it's public money that's being spent on them. The more use we can get out of them, the better. And the second comment was really right in the detail about cricket. You happen to come up with a report that says there is no demand for cricket at the same time as I had somebody come to my house this morning demanding facilities for, well, not demanding, asking nicely for facilities for cricket, particularly off-season, where what he said was the time of cricket sort of could stretch into September, but the footballers grab all the ground at that point, and it would be really nice to have some indoor cricket wickets so that we could do more cricket practice out of hours. So he was asking what sort of facilities are available for that and what sort of options are available. I've started digging into that and I've sent you an email about it earlier, but I think somewhere in this paperwork it does actually conclude they're a bit short of indoor cricket nets and indoor cricket facilities, so I wonder if you could comment on that. And the third question is, how does this get us forward to an answer for the 3G pitch in early?
Right, so I'll do them in reverse order, shall I? So the 3G pitch in early is basically, this is the evidence base, Pauline, and it shows that there is a need for a 3G pitch in early, and that we need to do some work. And I spoke to you about this before. We need to do some work where we set out clear criteria and look at all the possible sites in early to see whether one of them is actually suitable to deliver. But that is something that needs to follow on from the playing pitch strategy. Once we've agreed the evidence base, we can then move forward to sort of looking at potential sites. The cricket side of things, it's always a little bit of you take a snapshot in time. So a lot of people won't be aware in this, but we literally just opened a new cricket facility in Shinfield, which, as I sent Mark the video and the pictures of the pavilion, is very impressive. And it's been delivered by the University of Reading and it's being leased to Shinfield Parish Council. So what I'm saying is, when you look at the overall infrastructure delivery, if you look at all the sports in every SDL, you end up delivering poor size of facilities for the minority sports. So what we've did in our SDL strategy is we sort of focused the cricket where there seemed to be a lot of demand and a very active club, which was actually in Shinfield. So that seems to be where we focused our provision of cricket. So I'm not saying there isn't necessarily a need for indoor nets. We'll have to have a look at that. I know we used to have some in Rice Green, but that's about winter. That's about winter training, isn't it? An earlier start of training in the spring and things like that. I think they tend to be in leisure centres where they are, and we'll just have to see as we bring the built facility strategy forward whether there's any need there. In terms of the other thing about you were talking about is what's called secure community use, isn't it? And what we have to do is there's a whole set of criteria about what is actually defined in terms of secure community use. And where sites are owned by academies, they may, and some of the private schools, they will only allow the use if they get paid. So sometimes the clubs do not feel secure. And when we run that through that assessment report, it comes up as not in secure community use. It doesn't mean it's not necessarily available and isn't regularly available, but the security of it isn't guaranteed. We do work to reach out to sort of schools that have these kind of facilities. What I would say is where we invest in them, we tend to put clauses in the lease and the provision of that facility to make sure that we do secure the community use. So you won't see that term used where we've invested, for instance, in 3G pitches, say at Hembrook School or other schools, or Bowhunt, for instance, where we actually retained the ownership of those.
Thanks, Andy. The one that struck in my mind when I looked at it was Hawkton School. So I don't know how that was funded, but it was probably public money somewhere. It might not have been our public money, but it was probably some form of public money. I'm not saying it was, I don't know, but I think I think maybe taking a slightly wider view. The other very quick comment whilst I'm on the subject is there was a comment about Woodford Park and Soljoe.
Yep.
Both were assessed as good. Now I've seen the condition of the changing rooms in Woodford Park, and I wouldn't assess it as good.
They weren't, the Woodford Park changing rooms weren't assessed as good. They were assessed as standard.
Yeah, I wouldn't call them standard. I'm surprised they can't use them. Is the bottom line. And the Soljoe pitch, which I know has got no responsibility of yours, it's early town council, is pretty bad, and I think a lot of the cricket teams won't use it because of that. So, and that was assessed as fine. So I just wonder if you should have a look at getting your assessments pinned up to date. So just a couple of comments.
Yeah, they're about 2 years old. I think you have to remember that we've actually got what's called a red, amber, green kind of approach, isn't it? And which hides a whole lot of detail. And I happen to know that good is above 80%. Standard is between 50 and 80%, and then poor is below 50% on the score. So you can have things that are scored standard that can be pretty close to either poor or actually good. So it is an imperfect tool, but it is stuff. And I'll if you send me the details through, I'll have a look at the detailed sheets on them and see how we get.
Yeah, my recollection of Woodford Park was it was a sort of poor version of what you might find in a student flat. It was pretty horrible. So
it's also true that they're ancillary facilities, and they score all of the ancillary facilities. And one of the facilities they use in the scoring is the parking provision. And of course, the parking provision at Woodford is very good, so it probably skews the score a little bit.
Yeah, that could easily be the problem. So they can't use the changing rooms, but they can park.
Exactly.
Just coming in there, I was on the other side of this process as president of Wokingham Football Club and also of Wokingham, Embrook and Bearwood Cricket Club, and it was about 2 years ago. It was a real process they were on, and we really welcomed them, you know, across our threshold. Somebody was taking notice, which was really, really good, but she did explain to me at the time that they had trouble with access and it was quite difficult. So, you know, at the time I was the other side of the coin, and we really welcomed the process.
Can I just, before I go to Peter, I think on the cricket conversation, I have in my ward the excellent Crownwood and Crowthorne Cricket Club, which is a one-pitch facility that has exactly the same problem. They are over capacity, they are desperate for more facilities, they're looking at how they spread their usage out. Their youth club is growing massively, their women's cricket club is growing successfully, really doing well in their leagues, but they have a massive problem when it comes to the end of the August, beginning of September, when the football clubs go, we're taking over. Winter nets, additional facilities. I think especially in the south, I'm looking forward to the Grays Farm piece, which is at the next meeting. But I think the cricket piece, especially with the non-standard use, I guess, not the core use, but it's the usage outside in the winter and spring for training, winter nets, spring nets, etc. I'd like to make sure, Andy, that just putting a plug in for Crownwood and Crowthorne Cricket Club. And there is a need for the facilities down there, and I think especially in increasing participation for all, when you start seeing what they're doing at the club with women's cricket and youth cricket, their youth cricket facility they're almost too successful in people that are being attracted to it. And I sit there as the former ward councillor for Crownwood, which then merged with Crowthorne to form a new club. So, yeah, there's that point. Peter, I think you were next. Did I catch you on the hop then?
Did. Can I just start by congratulating the team for putting together such a comprehensive report. It did take me quite a long time to go through it. This is an example of good consultation, so we get some useful information out of it. I'm on the Climate Emergency Overview and Scrutiny Committee, so this question comes from that, which is artificial pitches don't really align with climate emergency and biodiversity aims that the council has. We know that artificial pitches capture a lot more solar radiation, create more heating. They're biodiverse free, basically. They're not a carbon sink. So, and there is a reference vaguely on the climate emergency impact of these projects that they will be reviewed. But I'm just raising the concern about, whilst sports people may want their artificial pitches to be able to play regularly, we do need to bear in mind our commitment to climate emergency and the biodiversity. So you can reference that.
So on biodiversity, it's quite an easy answer, which is, oh, sorry. Do you want me to answer?
Don't mind which of you.
So just to pick up the point, you know, with these things, you know, there's always sort of finite judgments and trade has to be considered. So any artificial pitch brings forward all of those sort of extra available hours, brings forward all of that sort of social cohesion, community development, brings forward all of that sort of public health, obesity, all of that sort of benefits that people get through communities and sport. So as ever, as community and civic leaders, there's that trade-off between, you know, the greater good. Fully accept the point that you've made, but there's, you know, equal and compelling benefits on that side of the ledger for community cohesion and all of that. And those are the balances as civic leaders that we have to balance and be judged by, I would guess.
Andy, anything you'd like to add to that?
Only on the I'll go on the biodiversity side as being an ecologist myself, which is to say the obvious one is that actually sports pitches themselves are pretty free of biodiversity, and if you have to deliver the same amount of provision in terms of grass pitches, you'd be delivering 4 or 5 times as much area. So there is some benefit biodiversity wise in, you know, reducing your footprint. So.
Jane.
Sorry, yeah, just to echo the thanks, it was a very comprehensive report. And as a former women's footballer and coach at Ashridge Park of a girls' team for many years, it's great to see the number of girls' teams in the borough. My question is, thinking about whilst under 16s are declining, girls' football is rapidly growing. So are we confident that the numbers stack up? So there might be a fall in population, but there's a growth in the female side of it. Has that been taken into account?
Yes, it has. They projected that need forward, but I think there is a level of uncertainty over the ONS data and how it applies to Wokingham anyway, and which is further exacerbated by the fact that we may have a higher housing target to deliver, and in which case the ONS data may not be appropriate. But at the moment, it's the best data we've got, Jane, and that's how we have to work on it, don't we? But I agree, there are some uncertainties around it. And
I feel quite churlish saying this, given the amount of information that was presented, but it's my ward, so I have to. It's Westcott, not Westcott. If we could take the T out of Westcott, that would be great.
We're always doing that, aren't we?
I think it's presumably to make sure that people are reading the report and finding errors. These are obviously deliberate.
It's at the start of the report, and it's about 2/3 of the way through.
Caroline.
Thank you, and I must say it was a very good report. I was just wondering, having been to a tennis court tournament in the field next door, the Blind Association or Berkshire Vision were playing. Do we get many requests, or do we have facilities for disabled and visually impaired people to continue playing sport?
So most of the facilities are unchanged, I think, aren't they, Carolyn? So certainly with the major football, rugby and cricket, they're played on the same facilities as able-bodied sport. Tennis, I'm not so sure about. And tennis it tends to be harder to engage with because it's less of a team sport. I mean, I'm a tennis player myself, but I don't belong to a club or anything. I just go and play tennis every week. So, which is probably true of a lot of people who play tennis. So it's much harder to engage that way. But you know, I haven't heard any requests about blind tennis, but I can check out with the team whether we have had any.
Anything else? Pauline, and then we'll move on in time.
Thanks, Chairman. One final question, Andy. If this does get approved, and please tell me, you can tell me later if you don't know yet, but how long do you think it'll be before you can make a decision on early and 3G?
Save the easy question to last, then, Pauline.
You know I always do that.
I know you do. I think that it's a good. If I'm honest, we need to do a proper consultation and assessment. So I think it's a good year's work to do that piece of work, to do the assessment, to get someone out and have a look at them independently, and then to put the findings out there and see how people feel about it. I think that is a year's work. It's also probably reliant on the fact of actually finding a suitable site.
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
You might come out of that and not have one. That's
I agree, actually. I think it's important to do it properly. Because
exactly.
it is, no matter where you're going to put it, it's going to be contentious for somebody.
It will be.
Mark, final comments.
Don't put it anywhere, it'll be contentious.
No, that's all right. I mean, as Pauline knows, we're working, aren't we, hard at that, cross-party, yeah.
No, I think if there's nothing else, any other comments, I think we've given it a good airing. I think I'd echo the comments everyone has said. This is an absolutely excellent, comprehensive report. It's, I know we've moved around the agenda over the last couple of meetings. This is a truly comprehensive report, and it's full of detail, sets that framework, sets the basis, and then onwards. But my thanks, and I think all of our thanks for all of the work that's gone into this really detailed report and findings. Thank you very much.
Chair.
Same comments apply. You're more than welcome to stay, should you wish.
I've got a shopping order arriving, so I shall probably drop off.
Thank you, Andy.
Cheers.
Thank you. Right, we're going to move on into the home straight. We're into the home straight on this one. This is the update on the waste and street scene procurement progress update. I would just say that because the ongoing nature of this and the commerciality and the commercial discussions that are going underway, certainly for Pauline and I that sit on the working group for this, there are some items that we can't discuss this evening because of the commercially sensitive nature of what's going on, and I'm reliant on others around the room. I think if Pauline or I start straying into inadvertently as they blur together into those areas. That being said, Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. There's not much I need to say other than just to remind you of the kind of things that Mark's just said, the confidentiality of this process. I think you're all well aware of that. We're really giving you an update so you know how this process of procurement is going on, which is something I think Overview and Scrutiny ought to know about. I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of Steve and Richard and Pam, who have all been very, very important players in the whole process.
Pam, thank you. Actually, Pam and Richard, welcome back. Thank you for coming back
Thank
to give the committee another update. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stephen. This is a very, very brief update. You'll be pleased to know after a very long evening for all of you. We just want to give you the latest position with this. So although we have provided other slides within the pack, our intention is not to go through those with you this evening, but just to focus on the ones where what's changed since the last time we come to speak to you. So Richard, if you can take me to slide 4, I think, and then that will take us straight into an update for you.
Does that change for you? There we go.
Yeah, is that slide 4, Richard, or is that
correct?
Yeah, thank you. So it's a little bit slow, so it's on a little bit of a reel, so we'll get there eventually. So since the last time we came to speak to you, we have had what's referred to as outline solutions from all of the bidders. And you may remember this is a two-stage process. So initially the bidders give us their broad solution along with pricing, and then they have a final stage, which is the ultimate process then that actually gets evaluated. So we've reviewed all of their solutions that they've presented to us. We have provided feedback to the bidders. And you may recall from the last briefing that we had an initial dialogue session with all the bidders, and we have now had last week the second and final dialogue with all the bidders. That was extremely productive, lots of useful information being discussed. But as the chair and as Stephen has rightly said, that's the detail of which I can't share with you, but to let you know that that has been a very productive process and has given us lots more work to go away and deal with. And the next stage we're at then will be bidders will now be able to request any final clarifications of us in the same way we can seek any further clarifications as well. And then they will ultimately be submitting their final tender, which will be due to us on the 7th of March. Thank you, Richard. So you'll be familiar with this plan on a page. This is just to sort of reaffirm really the details that I've just provided for you, and it just shows you where we are. We are on the home straight, as you just referred to as your session this evening as well. So we're definitely getting into that side of the process where we're coming more to the closure part of this. But still loads of good conversations taking place. And as we said before, the whole process is still on time and to plan. From all of the dates we set at outset, we're still expecting to come in at the dates that we planned for the project and for the procurement. Thanks, Richard. And really just to conclude, in terms of next steps, just a reminder really, the final evaluation will take place in March. So we'll receive the submissions, as I said, by the 7th of March, and then we will have quite a task to do to then evaluate all of those bids, which we expect to have completed by the end of March. We'll then have the process in April and May. We're due at full council in April, and then would hope to be in a position to be able to award in May 2025, and then go forward with mobilisation. So that's the very swift update from us, but we just wanted to make sure that we were checking in with you and making sure that you've got the latest position from us due to the size of the contract.
Thank you. And before I go to any questions, can I just say thank you for the support that both Pauline and I get through the briefings that we get as part of the confidential process. They are excellent in nature, and colleagues on the panel should be reassured of the nature of the updates that we get are appropriate for the conversation. So I'm grateful for that. Any questions on the update? Pauline.
Following from the budget conversation earlier, I just wondered if I'm trying to even find the name of it, this extended producer responsibility for packaging thing that we're getting money for, is there any worry about our waste collection that some of your responsibilities might change and might cause a problem in these contracts? And have you built the possibility that requirements might change as a result of that into the discussions you've been having?
Yes, so I think we're very conscious, Pauline, it's a very hot topic of discussion, as is all of the simpler recycling requirements at the moment. It's been a subject for all of the bidder discussions around what the opportunities are, what the potential issues are, how they're being factored in, and there has been some very healthy conversations, and all bidders are making provision to try to work with what might come out of EPR, to the extent that not all of it is predictable. So between us as partnerships, we are looking to see what we can do. As well as that, we are having very open and transparent conversations about contract contents and those sorts of things as well. So all of that is being discussed, including EPR. Yes, Pauline, very much so.
Thank you.
Sorry, any other questions? No? Okay. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Final stretch to follow, but thank you for the update.
Thank you.
On a very comprehensive piece of work, that most of which is commercially sensitive and can't be shared. But thank you very much indeed for that. And we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the winter highway maintenance plan. I'm not sure who's leading on this one. George?
Just, you've got Chris, Ian and Averis, I think, on the screen. So I'm not sure who's starting. Averis, is that you or Ian who's starting?
I will start, George. Thank you.
Chair, is that okay?
Evening all. Thank you for having us. So I'm gonna, obviously our winter service plan is published on our website, is readily available. For the purpose of this meeting, we submitted a summary of key points, and I'll just talk very shortly what we do, how we do, and just maybe mention few more facts